Well, Austin FC all of last year played just two teams from the East. They're already gearing up for their third team from the Eastern Conference coming up this weekend as they head to the nation's capital. As we are joined by the voice, and I would say unanimously, people would say the greatest voice of DC United of all time, also the only voice of DC United of all time, Dave Johnson, the television voice up there in Washington, D.C. Dave, how are you?
No, I'm doing well. That's the point. I am the greatest voice of DC United all time because I'm the only voice of DC United all time. It's like my son, when he was like about 7 years old, once said to me, he said, "Dad, since you're my favorite dad," and then he paused and said, "My only dad." So that's one way to get to the top. But I'm great. I'm so fired up, and I'm so fired up as I see the Austin banners behind you and the jerseys, because this sport has meant so much to me, and the fact that we're having so much success in Major League Soccer, it's due to places like Austin now coming in, giving us new energy. Every time I watch an Austin FC game and I see that crowd, and it just fires me up, and we're so glad that Austin FC is part of Major League Soccer.
Well, we're just a quarter century behind you. Of course, DC United was one of the originals. You're a Maryland guy, so that you get to call games for the team in your backyard. I'm an Austin, Texas guy. I get to do the same. Hey, you were at that very first match in 1996 over there at Spartan Stadium between DC United and San Jose. You didn't win the first match of the year, but you did win the last match of that year, more importantly. But I'll tell you right now, you're not the only voice of an MLS team that was at that match. We've already chatted with Ted Ramey this year. He was there with his dad, Hal, who was the first voice of the Earthquakes. And, of course, Ted now the radio voice. Any other originals still lingering around in Major League Soccer?
Well, I mean, JP Del Camera is an original, and he is still actively involved in soccer and one of the best ever in Major League Soccer. But I'm trying to think. Dwight Burgess still, I think, did some stuff with Columbus, but I think he finally stepped away. But he was from the first year. But there's not too many. But you mentioned Hal Ramey and the original San Jose Earthquakes. I tell this to fans, and this certainly applies to Austin FC fans. You think about all the sports, you don't really get an opportunity to be pioneers, if you will, or to be a part of the establishment. Baseball's already established, basketball, hockey, go right down the list. But professional soccer is really, 50 years in. I say 50 years because I was a child of the original North American Soccer League. And this has nothing to do with our interview, but I just have to look down at the book on my table. This is a book about the first Washington soccer team, DC United. I'm sorry, well, the Washington Diplomats. It was in the NASL, and it wasn't the first, but it was the long-standing one that drew crowds of 55,000 when the New York Cosmos came to town, and that type of thing. So this has been a long time in the making, and I think back to that opening game, it was so much excitement, but there was also like, all right, we've sold out Spartan Stadium, and it's back, but are we going to make it? And I can still remember the commissioner at the time, Doug Logan, getting asked questions, what did he expect for other opening day crowds? And he was saying, well, we hope for five figures, at least 10,000. And some reporters said, oh, you're kind of, lowballing it, because obviously 31,000 had showed up at Spartan Stadium. But he wasn't lowballing it because, I can tell stories about the late 80s, when we tried to reestablish soccer, professional outdoor soccer, the American Professional Soccer League. We could have a beautiful sunny day and we'd be hoping to get 2,000. And so he wasn't lowballing when he said he was hoping for five figures. Look, in this country, we can sell out, and we did for Olympic soccer. We're a big event country. We can do something once and sell it out and make it spectacular. But can we establish a league? And the answer now is a resounding yes. And it's going from strength to strength. The infusion of new teams like Austin FC adds to that, and it's not just now a league that's recognized in this country, but it's a league that's recognized on a worldwide basis with soccer-only stadiums. You've got one there in Austin. Your team is going to play in one that's located in D.C., where the Potomac and Anacostia rivers come together. I never thought I'd see such a thing in my lifetime, and we have it, and that's why there's so many reasons for excitement.
Yeah, the match at Audi Field this weekend. We'll dive into that matchup here in just a moment. Let me ask you, obviously, over the course of 25 years, we've seen technology dramatically change what we can do broadcast-wise. How has your end as a broadcaster changed in terms of your experience calling Major League Soccer over the past 2.5 decades?
Well, I think it's interesting. It's just that I'm still learning more and more every day because when I say learning, it just the amount of it's like today, on one of the streaming services, I'm watching a couple Europa League games and that type of thing. Whereas um, when I was probably your age or before, we I mean, you look like a young, healthy guy. You're probably 30, right? What are you? How old are you?
I'm just a decade behind you.
Oh, well, see, well, you're looking good. You're looking much better than I am. But the point being is that once upon a time we were hopeful to get highlights of a game on a television station from Europe, and now you get every game on some kind of streaming service. So that's one thing that is changed dramatically, but also just the quality of the broadcast, the number of angles that you have to choose from. I never thought we'd have VAR to the point, we have it, and I think I'm starting to warm to it. I'm not so sure. I still like the human error involved in games. I always said that I'd be happy if they just used VAR to decide whether a goal was a goal, or in other words, a goal line technology. I could live with blown offside calls or you didn't because now I think to some degree it's getting a real ridiculous where we're saying was his head leaning 4 inches ahead and we're doing that by freezing it, whereas in the run of play you can't tell that. And so I still think now, and I know they've looked into changing this, but they said that even was on. That was a dramatic change in the offside law. Well, now they need to say that to me, if any part of your body is even, then you're on. And this business where your head just happens to be leaning a little bit forward and the rest of you is onside, that's offside. To me, that's a little bit crazy and it makes it, to a point of the game where, let referees' assistants still have a role. But now I've gotten off the track, but that is a technological difference. And I think that was your question.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes we're just watching the Kentucky Derby and some replays up there to see whose snout gets across that line first.
That's the part that drives me nuts.
You're from the area. You went to Towson there in the state. What was the first time you called a live sporting event? Do you remember?
First time I actually, called a live sporting event. That's a good question. Probably my freshman year at Towson State would have been actually. I grew up calling imaginary games from my mother, but like I think every broadcaster did. But it probably would have been Towson State, probably Towson State football, believe it or not, in the fall of '82 would have been the first live event where I was actually in a booth for something.
For the past quarter century, not just the voice of DC United, but also there apparently is an NBA team in that area, the former Bullets, now the Wizards. You and Mark Followill, both NBA guys who also juggle MLS schedules. Is there anybody I'm overlooking in that category?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Mike Conti, who does Atlanta Hawks pre and post game on basketball, is the radio voice of Atlanta United now. But in terms of television, I think that we might be the only two NBA crossovers.
So this past month, that means a busy month for you juggling. And I know when the schedule comes out, you're a lot like me. You're just fingers crossed. You can't control when those dates are, but you're hoping there's as little overlap as possible. Let me have you look back at just during the pandemic stretch after sports were restarted. What was your typical week like? How much bouncing back and forth? And was it all remote, just whether you're calling basketball or soccer?
Well, I think back to when the pandemic, hit in March of 2020, and we were in the basketball season. MLS season had just started. In fact, there's nothing humorous at all about what we've been through in terms of pandemic. But as I look back, I almost have to laugh. So we were on a West Coast road trip with the Wizards, and I was in Sacramento. And I was on a Friday night. This is before we shut everything down. And DC United's home opener and season opener was the next day, an afternoon game in Washington, D.C. So the team was going from Sacramento to Golden State. That was their next game. It was going to be a relaxing weekend for the Wizards. They have a Saturday night off in San Francisco and play Sunday against the Warriors. But I took a red-eye flight from Sacramento, and I couldn't get a nonstop, so I had to go through Boston, and I changed planes and landed at D.C., and my partner, Deb McTavish, picked me up at the airport, and thank God all the flights worked out on time, and drove me right to Audi Field. It was like 25 degrees that day. We played Colorado, the season opener. We did the broadcast, and then I had to catch a flight to get back to San Francisco to catch up with the team, which I did. And then we played the Warriors on that Sunday, and then we flew back to DC because that was the last game of our West Coast road trip. So I'm going back and forth across the country. And then the thing I laugh about is then a week later, we just stopped not only traveling, but moving. I'm thinking, well, if we were going to shut everything down, could we have done it a week earlier? But it started a bizarre period of time where I think you realized how much you missed so many things, including sports. And I think it was also the important thing is that avoiding COVID, yes, that does keep you healthy, but your mental health is also important. And I think that's the phase we're at now. We're always going to have, I think, COVID in some form to deal with. It's how we deal with it. And yes, we've got to take precautions when we can take precautions, but it's good to be living life again. It's good to be connecting with people again. It's great to be on this technology we're on right now, but there's nothing better than being in person again. It was so strange calling the number of games I did remotely, and then calling them not only remotely, but it's almost like a double remote, because then you're calling a game with no fans. It was great to be able to do that, because for a while we're doing nothing, no calling of games. We were trying to look back instead of look ahead, because there's nothing to look forward to. So, I never did take for granted each and every game, but now when I show up and I hear drums and sirens and smoke going off and whatever, I appreciate it even more, because we're back together. It's the most important part of what the sports experience is about. It's people.
Yeah, we went from that 2020 restart where you could hear everything the coach was screaming all the way across the pitch to the far midfielder, now to where the coaches can't hear the guy right next to them when we have a capacity crowd that we're dealing with. You had a chance to call a World Cup in 2006. What was that experience like for you?
Well, the greatest month of my life, or one of the greatest months of my life. It was truly incredible. It just doesn't do it justice. It was such an immersion, not only into the game, but again, people. I think about traveling all the cities I did, and meeting the people I met. And there's just no other sporting event like the World Cup, how it brings people together. I still remember and I'm getting off track here, but I still remember '94 when we hosted the World Cup, and I remember watching Norway had upset Mexico, and I remember watching fans stream out of the stadium, and a guy with a Viking hat consoling a guy with a sombrero. And I thought, well, this is the only way you'd see this picture, a Norwegian and Mexican fan coming together. But just so many, it was 40 days in Germany. It was so many wonderful memories. I had some great people I worked with, Christopher Sullivan and Jeff Vegas, were commentators, on that with me, and also Manny Lagos, who's now doing such a wonderful job with Minnesota United, and this trouble, you start naming people, you start going to forget. But Carlos Valderrama was part of our broadcast team. It was just a wonderful experience for a month, and Andres Cantor was part of our group. In fact, I say part of our group. I was part of his group. Let me rephrase that. Alejandro Gutman and all the people at Football de Primera, they continue to do such a wonderful job on the Spanish language side. It was truly an honor to be a part of that on the English side, and it's a memory I think back to often.
Yeah, I got to see Manny last week. He was my next door neighbor in the press box when Minnesota came to town. Got to call some of his NASL games when he was in charge of the Loons. For you, I assume the transition to radio for the World Cup was easy enough for you just because of calling radio for the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's two different, obviously it's two different ways and two different approaches because radio, you are the eyes and ears, and it is theater of the mind. In some ways, radio for a broadcaster is more enjoyable because you really get and I shouldn't say more enjoyable, but when it is a different art. I guess that's what it gets down to, and it really becomes a challenge, especially with the pace of an NBA game, or with the incredible skill of the soccer game we're watching to describe and accurately describe. So every game, it's always a challenge. It still is for me in the NBA. You never know what kind of move is going to be executed, and can you paint that picture properly, or what makes soccer always, and even on television as well, that to call is you don't know when that goal is going to happen. God, we were reminded of that when DC played at Atlanta in the 90th minute just a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden that header, and wow, where did that come from? So it's why we're so riveted by this game, and why we watch and listen, because when's that big moment going to happen? It's not scripted, but certainly, I always say that any kind of radio experience will help you in any kind of broadcasting experience, because I was a disc jockey of various formats, whatever. Just turn the mic on. I'll start talking. I don't know if it'll be entertaining, but if you want me to talk for 4 hours, I'll talk for 4 hours.
Well, let's dive into one of your many jobs. That is, again, the voice of DC United. Real quickly, how do you sum up last season for the club, and this offseason, their priorities and what they were able to accomplish during the offseason?
Well, I think, last season, and this happens with every team, Ben Olsen was such a driving force on the field and then off the field for DC United. He carried DC United through as a coach during a period of time when you had an ownership change, a new ownership, the expense and challenge to building a new stadium, because it's not easy. And I'm not even trying to insinuate it's easier to build a stadium in Austin or any other place. But having said that, there's a reason why the Washington NFL team plays in suburban Maryland. There's a reason why it took 50 years to finally build a stadium in downtown, arena in downtown DC. This is a difficult town to get things done in. So it was that period of time when Ben Olsen was the period of time is basically a decade, 2010 on, that he was the head coach. It was a challenge to both be competitive on the field and then also meet the requirements that were needed to be done off the field. And that was the transition from a great soccer facility, but an aging soccer facility. RFK Stadium. Again, I watched crowds of 50,000 in the original North American Soccer League with the Cosmos and Canalia and Pele and Johan Cruyff and the Washington Diplomats. So many U.S. national team games at RFK Stadium. For a while, that was a go-to venue, but that was more 90s, early 2000s. Its age was showing, and DC United needed a new facility. During that period of time, Ben Olsen managed to guide that team to some playoffs, some impressive finishes. But last season, it was a new energy and a new time. And that happens in all sports with all teams. And Hernan Losada came in, and he came in with an attitude of that seemed to really rejuvenate not only the team, but also the fan base. He talked about attack first, vamos por United. I mean, he didn't hit the ground in a conservative way. He hit the ground in a very, this is the way I want to play way. Believe in me, come along for the journey. We might not be the biggest spending team in the league, but I'm going to punch above our weight. So it got people fired up. And for a long time, I think DC United was kind of a story because, they were surprising people with where they were standing. In the end, injuries and a lot of things seemed to catch up with DC United, and they just didn't have that oomph. And I'm not making excuses, but they just seem to run out of gas at the critical moments to win the critical matches, and they needed to, and thus they missed the playoffs basically on the final day by 1 point. But there was definitely an energy and spirit about Hernan Losada that was established last year. And I think the goal was, I know the goal was to continue it and build on it going into this season and to win 2 games out of the gate, to have a very successful home opener. There were signs of that. But this is also Major League Soccer, where it's a long season. Sometimes getting things off the ground in transition are difficult. And I think we're seeing that with DC United. Michael Estrada, a big offseason acquisition. If you're going to have a team that plays on the front foot, well, somebody has to score goals. Well, he's only played in a couple of games now because he was sorting out various visa issues and that type of thing, the paperwork. Taxi Funtas, who probably will be on the bench. Again, an off-season acquisition that we didn't think was coming till the summer, a Greek international that played first division soccer in Austria. He's practicing now. He should be on the bench for Saturday's game against Austin. So I think it's a team that is ready to take off. But like probably a lot of other teams in MLS is still trying to get it together, because what makes this league great is you cannot predict, like in some leagues, all right, these teams are going to finish top 6. You don't know. Look what Charlotte's doing right now as an expansion team, but that could change, and they know that. Austin, we're happy. What is it? 3 wins in 6 games, right? It's flying high, but it could all change. And so Major League Soccer, what keeps you glued in is the way the schedule is, really start talking to me in August, because that's when you're going to see, where the real teams that are still competing are. But right now, it's kind of a discovery period. But I think that's true for all teams.
Yeah, both of our clubs had very similar starts in terms of when you look at what the schedule makers gave them. Both teams played Cincinnati. You all did have the expansion side in Charlotte, while Austin had Miami. And I think even though both clubs took care of business those first 2 weeks, a lot of people still had questions. Well, was it because of the opposition, or were these improved teams? And we know it's a long journey ahead, and there's only so much that can be won. You just try to claim as many points as you can here early on.
No, and that's just it. And somebody even asked Hernan Losada about, look at your schedule, almost like putting points to the bank, because on paper you're thinking, you've added a great expansion team. And, this reminds me of I'm not trying to, again, I don't get into that comparison of leagues business in terms of, where would you rate MLS compared to the French league or the English second division or whatever. But in terms of the competition, it does remind me of the English Championship, effectively the second division, where, there's certain clubs you say, well, those clubs, they spent more money, they should be at the top at the end, but that might not be the case. And I always, the classic example of never knowing how things are going to work in Major League Soccer, the year Colorado and FC Dallas competed for MLS Cup, nobody saw that coming. And yet there they were competing for the championship game. So did anybody have New York City winning it all last year? I'm not sure. I didn't necessarily think they were going to win it all. They did. So it's carrying on to this season. At some point, known Bruce Arena more than 30 years. I think New England's going to get it right at some point. But here we go. And this is what gets us talking. Austin suddenly is a talking point, and you're scoring goals. But I watched the game the other night against Minnesota, and you found a way to finish, and that's critical as well. So this is why you get so pumped up about this league. I don't know what's going to happen on Saturday. We're the home team. DC United is, coming off a break thanks to New York City's Champions League schedule. That's why they gave us last week off, because they want to give time for New York City. But I don't know what's going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. A lot of fans are overlooking, well, not only did you have last weekend off, but it's been about a 2-week hiatus because of that international break as well. Has that allowed anybody who perhaps was dealing with bumps and bruises to reemerge? I know your starting lineup has had several moving parts here in the first month of play.
Yeah, I think it's, Russell Canals, who's a very important part of our team, is just coming, back to full fitness. So, basically we've had one game, to your point, and I guess one game in like 3 or 4 weeks, because there was the international break. We played one game, and then last week we were scheduled to play a game, but they moved that. It was supposed to be against New York City. Um, Chris Durkin is now just coming back from Belgium. Um, I would think it gives us a chance um, to reboot a little bit, or get fully healthy. Not that you know 3 or 4 weeks into the season you should be gassed, but I think, given trying to integrate new players, trying to get Michael Estrada back from we again the international break. He's an Ecuadorian on the Ecuadorian national team, trying to get a new player in Taxi Funtos sorted out from Europe. I think it was helpful, obviously, to have the break and not try to do that while you're playing, 4 games in 4 weeks.
Let me ask you about two specific players, one of whom is no longer in the nation's capital because he's here in the state capital in Felipe. He's already been a great ambassador from the club here. I know he spent a little over a couple seasons with you all. Anything that stand out from his time with you?
Yeah, he's a wonderful addition to any club. Anybody wants Felipe as a teammate. I think about his will and determination to recover from the knee injury, the serious knee injury he had. What he gives on the field is just always everything. You feel it bleeding out of him. You feel his passion, his love for the game. Certainly, I even gained more appreciation and felt that even more during his recovery from that knee injury. But he is a true professional, and he's one of those players that you say, boy, are we glad we have him. And we were glad we had him when we did have him, and I'm sure that's the way he's felt about in Texas, because he bled black and red when he was here, and I guess he's bleeding green and black. But that's you feel his energy, you feel his passion for the game, and so I'm sure he has become that way in Austin. But he was a fan favorite in DC because of his commitment to the way he played the game.
Yeah, I have to imagine we'll see a more expanded role for him moving forward with the new club, just as we get deeper and deeper into the season. He's already winning over fans just in the interviews alone that he's had during media availability. The other guy I want to talk about, you've only used one keeper this year. It is Hamid. He's in the midst of the month of Ramadan right now, which I think first at least hit my radar back when Hakeem Olajuwon was, right on the cusp of the NBA playoffs every time this year. How have you seen Hamid, obviously juggle both his fasting as well as still being able to compete for those 90 minutes each year?
Each year he's done it. He is, again, he's our one of our homegrown players, and technically I think he's our first that we call him a homegrown player. We have 18 now that have come through, DC United's, academy and youth pro. It's now called academy, but the various youth programs, because for DC United it goes back to the late 2000, be right around 2010. He's one of the best goalkeepers in the league, and has been. And that's not easy to say for as long as he has been on the field. But when he's been on the field for DC United, with the exception of his brief stay in Denmark, he's always been among the best, and is obviously had some looks for the U.S. national team. But he is still doing what you hope, every great goalkeeper does, make that one save that literally saves the game. And he has done that in every game so far this season that I can think of. He comes up with that save and says, he just gave us a lifeline and gave us a chance. So when you look at DC United right now, I think the defense is a strength, and that includes trying to beat Bill Hamid. And that's no matter what he is dealing with. He is not only strong in his presence, but also in his presence of mind.
Well, after a MLS competition this weekend, you, like Austin, will dive into U.S. Open Cup as you all pursue your 4th Open Cup. Wish you all the best in that. Of course, in the trophy case already, 4 MLS Cups, 4 supporter shields. But there's already history between Austin, Texas, and D.C. when it comes to soccer. I would argue the greatest trophy you all are in possession of. 2015, you all came to Austin for your preseason. It was the ATX Pro Challenge, and you all left town with a bronzed armadillo with a cowboy hat and revolvers at its hips. I have to imagine that's right there with those other pieces of silverware.
Well, that's a good point because obviously that was 2015. We moved into Audi Field 2018. So I got to double check that that's properly arranged in our trophy case. I must admit, I've not actually looked at the trophy case in a while, just because I used to see it at the offices at RFK Stadium. So that you've given me reason to look at that. But but in all seriousness, in Austin, first of all, I've never been to Austin, believe it or not, but I've heard nothing but great things about what a town it is. I believe, and I'm going to get off the track here, there's a guy named Dave Brett, who's a tremendous soccer fan that goes back to the original NASL that is based in Austin. There was a guy I want to say named Wolfgang Sunholtz, who I believe sadly may have passed away at some point. But
over my left shoulder here, that shirt, that's Wolfgang's name in green. Again, as he coined, Austin is a soccer city, and this city has embraced and ran with that even after his passing.
Well, and see, that's what we're talking about here is I mean, DC had soccer roots before the start of Major League Soccer, but we needed the people that were involved even before the start of MLS to be involved in MLS. And it's the same thing with Austin, because guys like Wolfgang Sunholtz, they gave so much to establish soccer in their communities. My first broadcast partner in DC was a guy named Gordon Bradley, who helped bring Pele to this country with the New York Cosmos. If they don't get Pele in this country, I say helped. I mean, he helped. There was so many people involved, from Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, Clive Toy. But you could argue, if they don't get him to this country and he creates this boom in the 70s, where are we? The point being that is so wonderful that Austin is a soccer city, because that's what Wolfgang Sunholtz gave for his life. And now the tradition and legacy can continue, and it's burning bright in green and black.
Dave, we look forward to having you eventually here at Q2 Stadium when the schedule makers allow for it. Before we wrap things up, before your diagnosis, I know MS was already close to your heart with your mom. Where can folks help contribute? I'll include a link below here on the video.
If you go to my Twitter page, which always seems to be at Dave J Sports, I do have a link there, but it's a national MS society. I'm dealing with a battle for multiple sclerosis. We're doing so many wonderful things. The MS Society, the MS Society is doing so many wonderful things. We're getting close to a cure. It's a disease that sadly claimed my mother's life at a way too young age of 43. I've got it, and it's and anybody out there that has multiple sclerosis, it provides challenges, but it's challenges that together, like a lot of people, and this is the one thing with sports, it brings people together, and we can help people in so many ways through sports. I'm still involved. I don't know if you can see this red band. It's the Children's Cancer Foundation. We get people together. I think about the supporters here in DC. We're actively, cheering on DC United, and that's great. But at the end of the day, what is there now? 28 teams in MLS. At the end of the day, only 27 are going to be happy at the end of the year. So we're all going to have to endure. Only one's going to be happy. 27 are going to be unhappy. So we're all going to have to endure our share of losses. But what we always have is the supporter culture that's a gain, and how we can make a difference in our community. And if that sounds sappy, I'm sorry, but that's the way it works. That's why the Screaming Eagles, the Barra Brava, the Ultras, the District Bandito, all the supporters group are such great friends, because we want the black and red to do well, but we want everyone to do well.
Well, I know anybody who's ever heard your call and has had a chance to talk with you is obviously rooting for you, maybe not rooting for DC United from the standpoint of the folks back here in Texas, but I certainly appreciate your time. This upcoming weekend, where can folks in the nation's capital find your call?
Our call will be on NBC Sports Washington on Saturday night. So and then we also have, for our Spanish friends, my good friend Moises Linares, Teleexitos in DC is another place you can find it.
Again, that is a 5:30 Eastern kick. For those of us in Texas, that is 6:30 Eastern. And to kind of borrow one of Dave's phrases, his call's also on the net. It'll be on ESPN Plus, as he is the home voice. He'll have that call. Everybody tuning in here in Austin, of course, we'll have Adrian Healy, Michael LaHood on the CW Austin. Remember to tune in a half hour before that, 6 Central, for their pregame show of My Radio Call on Alt 97.5 and on the iHeartRadio app here throughout Central Texas. Dave, certainly appreciate your time. I know it's a busy time of year. I'm thrilled for you that because of the World Cup, most of the MLS season is going to wrap up before that NBA preseason gets underway. So as hectic as your schedule is, regardless, with your radio gig during the early mornings as well, at least maybe there's a little more breathing room along the way. All the best this weekend. Well,
listen, thank you. And thank you to everyone in Austin for making another great Major League Soccer franchise. Great things are ahead for the people of Austin. By the way, Chris Quinn is an Austin FC executive, a good friend of mine, worked with the Washington Wizards, so we claim him. So you're in good hands with Chris Quinn. You had Wolfgang Sunholz working down there. You got so many great things in Austin. I hear you're also the coolest city on the planet, so I got to get there.
Just not in August. We're not the coolest city on the planet in August. But Dave, hey, go find that armadillo. That's your homework for now. Appreciate you.